items. With this webinar now, you have the option to raise your hand. That is if you wanted to perhaps ask something or wanted some attention. And you also have the option of asking a question. And when you do so, I will be seeing it here popping up, and then I'll answer them as we go. Unless it's something that I can wait till the end, I will just take an answer at that point. At the end, I will be asking a few questions, doing a small little poll, just something about the training to see if you found it helpful or not. I would appreciate if you would just take a moment or take a few clicks to answer those questions. I'm also recording this call and will again make a video available on YouTube with the recording for those who cannot make it. So you should have that in the next few days. The training itself, it will be a little bit of a repeat from 2 weeks ago, in that a number of you who are registered today were not on the last call. So I will be doing some repeat of what was on the last call, but the biggest part on this, at the end of this training, I will be demonstrating an Access database where we just have quickly thrown something together that connects to the Spire API, and we do some updating on a customer record. And then once the call is done, I will be sending out an email, hopefully get it out by tomorrow, and we'll be sharing that Access database so that you can go and have a look yourself and perhaps start using that to start your development effort with Spire. That's it. So I'm going to get going here. So first, what is REST API? REST API is a architectural standard for the World Wide Web. And so REST API is much more than just an API written for a few applications here and there. Rather, it's a standard that all companies by now start adopting in some form and some fashion. So when we're talking about the Spire API, we're talking about a much bigger picture. We're talking about the REST API. So then when you start considering working with the REST API, first off, you don't need to necessarily rely on Spire to train you or to show you what to do with the API. You can simply just learn about REST API from all kinds of sources out there, and I'll mention one source at the end that we've used for training on REST API, and also other trainings on technology. So then what's important here to remember is that as you start working with the Spire API, is that you're learning general concepts, general architectures about systems. And just one example, I've been a user for a number of years now, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with the Nest product for controlling your temperature in your house and having the ability to let itself learn and so forth. And just before this training, I actually went and looked at their website and did a quick search. And so sure enough, they have their API now as well. And I don't think that was out. It's been only recently released. So they have their API so you can interact with different things. And this is all geared towards automating your home and having other hardware manufacturers plug into their API so that you can do everything from their app. So it's largely being adopted, and it's only been really become popular in the last 2 years, where this has become an architecture or a platform that many companies are adopting. So then an example is you probably have already a number of times come across a service that you're signing up for, a website or something that you're signing up for, and they give you the option to use your Facebook username or your Google username, LinkedIn, whatever else you would have to sign up with them. And as you'll have seen, then usually you go and say yes, and then it pops up a permission screen from Facebook. So that's all REST API. That's what connects a lot of the systems together today. So the next, RESTful API in the cloud. I know that there's quite a bit of controversy, especially perhaps among us as BB partners, about the cloud and reluctance and adopting it, and what is it, and what does it do. And so then I'm going to suggest today there's a very narrow window approach when we think about, oh, it's just all about, you get your applications to the cloud and you start giving up privacy and whatnot, and it's dangerous because you don't know where your applications are running on. And so that's a very narrow approach to what the cloud is. The cloud is a much bigger picture, in that if you learn the RESTful API, REST API, it goes by RESTful. If you learn the RESTful API, you will learn much about interconnecting systems in one service from another one. So Facebook, Google Maps, services such as, and I'll mention one briefly here, such as you will see at, let me go to that screen. Oops, there it was. Let's go back here. Services such as at airports, when you look at screens of flights and airport status and flight status and landing, this is the service provider, like flightstats.com. They are a service provider to all airports across the world, at least North America that I know of. When you look at a flight status somewhere on a screen, you could actually literally connect to their service, and it's available, freely available. You don't have to pay for anything. You can connect to their service, to their API service, and you can look up those exact same stats that you're seeing on an airport screen. So that's what it is. So it's a much larger picture when you think about the RESTful API and the cloud, in that it doesn't even require for you to have your applications in the cloud. You can actually develop your own private cloud, and that could very well mean that your application and the things that you develop, they are hosted locally behind a company firewall, and it works like a cloud service, and that's essentially referred to as a private cloud. So what I'm trying to say here is that when you think cloud, it's a much bigger picture than just simply thinking, oh, I'm taking my data and I'm going to put it on somebody else's server and I don't know where it's hosted and what it's doing. So my suggestion is look at it from a different perspective than just that simple one view of not having your applications in the cloud. That said, so network security is very important here. If you are going to be developing for the Spire API and you're going to have an application that connects from the outside into inside the firewall of the company, you have to take security very seriously. And here you'd want to talk to a person if you're not the one doing the hardware and security at this company. Here you want to talk to a very knowledgeable person, and do stay away from your Linksys or your D-Link routers attempting to do anything with them. You need to have some really good security in place. Firewall that I've been recommending and using for a lot of customers, a very affordable firewall, Untangle, very affordable firewall for companies, and very comprehensive in terms of what it delivers. So something like that you need to have in place and have a really good understanding of what that all does and how to protect your network from potential threats or even stealing data. So here too, when we look at it from this perspective of having a comprehensive security in place for protecting your data, and you want to develop something that connects from the outside to the behind the firewall of the company, you essentially have your little own private cloud in place, and you need to have comprehensive protection, which any centers today have when you actually do have your applications on, such as Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or any of the other ones. So that's highly critical here, security. The next thing, SSL, I had a number of questions of people getting back to me and found it confusing or didn't understand what it does and have never had to use it in any of the development you've done. So there are a few things that were mentioned. One is that you don't necessarily have to use SSL when you develop for Spire, which is true. I had my developer do some more work on that, which is true. Like the Access database I'm going to show at the end does oops, let's go back, does not need an SSL certificate in order to connect to the Spire API. But I want to add that if you're doing any kind of web development and you have a service connecting from the outside to the Spire database, and so one thing we are working on a mobile app, comprehensive app that will connect to Spire API, and then you can look up customers, create customers, and whatnot. And that will connect, in many cases, I'm sure it will connect from the outside to behind the firewall. And so SSL is critical, and you don't want to overlook that. And it's essentially the same as I'm sure most of you bank online. You go into your bank site, so you'll always see HTTPS, meaning that's a certificate, and the information between you and the bank, it's encrypted, so no one can read that. If you do this in any shape or form without an SSL certificate, you are asking for compromises, and your data can be clearly read if there's some form of interception, and there are many kinds of interceptions. So you do not want to do anything without a SSL if you're exchanging information from behind the firewall to somewhere public internet. That's number one. One way, so right now, first to note is that the Spire API is not hardened, and it's not necessarily ready for opening up a port and reading information and whatnot. They haven't worked that far, and I'll explain briefly on what's still missing on that API. So one thing that we are doing at the moment is we are planning on doing some kind of VPN connection to the network. So then something sophisticated would have to be in place. Again, like the Untango firewall has very sophisticated VPN capabilities built in. So there needs to be some kind of VPN connection. And then, of course, it's a private tunnel. Then you can exchange information. But even then, have the SSL there, just in case it further down the road, there's more hardening on the Spire API. So very critical. Security, you want to take that as your number one approach. That's the first thing you want to think about as you develop. That if you go and develop something and you want to go and either just for your own customers, maybe not as critical, but if you want to go and make this available to the market to sell, that's the first thing you want to be ready for. That if somebody comes and looks at your solution and is interested in your development efforts that you're doing, you always want to be ready to have that discussion right up front without anything. So if you have a company that has their Linksys or a D-Link router, or even an IT provider who's not very familiar, who knows, maybe reluctant to do anything and say, yeah, it's all good, you want to make sure you're well informed on what this all is and what it all entails from a network security standpoint, so that you can give advice, and then of course ultimately it's to sell your applications and for the customer. So that's critical, highly critical. I'll actually take the authentication methods first, and I'll briefly talk about the other point. So here is the authentication methods, and this is where it's going to become more hardened. So I just today, and I'll briefly talk about that after as well, but just today I was checking the release notes, or the roadmap for the API that Spire is using, like the framework. So Flash API, that's the framework they're using, and I'll briefly talk about it after. So I was reading their roadmap for their next release. And so they included this line, authentication, including sessions, basic, and token authentications. So this is exactly the different authentications that are needed. So currently, Spire API works only with the basic authentication. And basically what you do, you get to the company endpoint. So let me do that here. So we get to the company's endpoint, which is this. Just load that here. Oops, I must have done something here that wasn't right. Just a second. Let's do this again. Somehow it doesn't like it. I'll just show you. I'll just show the URL. Not sure what it is I'm doing. So here we see this is up to this point. That's the company's endpoint, and that's when you go to that URL, you can see the companies. And currently what we are doing is we are developing, we have this published, but we restrict it by IP address. So that means that you have to be a specific IP address. And again, we're doing it at the firewall level where we restrict it by IP address. So this is the company's endpoint, and that's where you see the companies. And that is actually public information. So if you didn't restrict it by IP address, then you would actually completely exposing that information. So somebody could come to the company's endpoint, could click on it, but once you get inside the company, then it will actually ask you for for the username and password. And that is where the basic authentication comes in. So it's only authenticated by the username and the password from within Spire. So the username that's set up in Spire. So that's the highest level of authentication you're getting currently, which is not nearly enough in that you do want to go further than just basic authentication. And so we have to wait now for Spire to actually implement. So as the Flash API is being developed. So as soon as they have it, then I'm sure Spire will also add that option. In token exchange, basically what it is, it's a private key, and then so there's a setup involved. There's a private key, and then there's a token that gets generated, and that token is being used by the application. And that can be fully automated, so it just needs to be set up, can be fully automated, and that's the authentication level that we are ultimately going to want to look for to make the Spire API the most useful, in that you will be able to connect with devices. You'll be able to essentially have your port open for the Spire API like this and have it published to the World Wide Web. And you will be able to authenticate, so then that makes it much more secure in terms of what's being exchanged, and there's a high level authentication. And then second, you can then also still use the basic authentication. That would be like the next level of making sure this user is actually set up in Spire and that they can do their things in Spire. So that would be the basic authentication and the token. And there's different authentication methods, so I don't know what will all come, but that will all become part of it. And this is where it's important that you learn the RESTful API and that you just don't, number one, I don't think anyone should expect that Spire will provide comprehensive training on this, and that they will probably, which they already are, provide some samples of connection and how to do things. But you should all be prepared to go and educate yourself on the REST API, and that will take you far if you do that. We have about 2 to 3 years into the REST API now since we started. So we started when it was very new and just getting going and learned and stumbled along. We do, as some of you know, we develop an integration for the Magento in Business Vision, and now also for Spire in Magento. And so Magento's had the REST API for almost 2.5 years now. So that's where we started in. And that's where we started with the REST API and started learning. And so we are making use of it on that side as well, and on the Spire side as well. And we'll talk about it a little bit more after. Next, RESTful API, web-based, no need to know the application logic. So that's a very important step, in that many of you know, who have done development for Spire and have done all kinds of method reverse engineering and whatnot. I mean, for Business Vision, you know that we need to know the logic of the application in order to do anything. So that is different from the RESTful API. So essentially, anybody can go and develop. They just use the some form of framework for the REST API, either develop it from scratch or use something like Spire has done here. Use a framework that's already being developed. So then no need for us now to know the logic. So for example, if you would insert an order from some other system to the Spire API, we would essentially insert into at least 3 tables that I can think of: the address table, the sales header, and the sales detail. So we would be inserting into 3 tables. And with the REST API, all we have to do, we just have to present the information, and I will show on the Access database a little bit later on. We have to just present the information based on REST API concepts and insert the data into the database, and so into the application. And so the logic of how the application worked and how it did things like taxes and whatnot, you don't need to know any of it. It's not needed. So you just need to know, you need to understand the REST API and specific the API to the application, and you will be able to work with it, no problem. So then what potentially will happen as well is that many companies that are moving on to Spire, there will be developers coming along that have no clue what Spire is and where it's coming from and what it does. They will now be able to actually quite nicely be able to go and develop their applications, and they'll just say, okay, here's the REST API, and this is how it works, and they'll be able to do custom work, and we'll see that more and more. We've been involved in some projects where people have come to us, like web developers for Business Vision. They say, well, does it have a RESTful API? Well, no, it does not. And so pretty much anybody can now go and develop for it, and we should look at that as an opportunity versus somebody taking business away from us, and that we can get involved at certain levels. But I guess, yeah, our largest opportunity will come from developing ourselves application add-ons for Spire, and selling them, or just doing that as a one-off project for our customers. So one quick question, I know this came up last call. There was also a number of people asking this question afterwards. What about desktop application? Is it possible? So what I did for this call, I had my developer just quickly throw together an Access application, just an Access database where we connect to the REST API. So yes, it's possible. You could do some simple things like develop an Access database to do different things and use the Spire API for that type of interaction. So it's possible, but largely, and going forward, I mean, we all know that everything is becoming web-based, and it's apps on mobile phones. Just about anything you can imagine. I was just reading about it a little bit yesterday on mobile development newsletter, and that's related to our own efforts in developing our app for Spire. Schools. I read about a school board in British Columbia who developed an app for parents to interact for sending authentications, and they said it had become very, very popular. So there's a day coming, and this is actually something that, for those of you who read the biography of Steve Jobs, the Apple founder, he dreamed of developing something so that there would be immediate feedback from the class to the parent. So a student would essentially go and write a test or go and do some form of assignment, and the minute that it's done, the student has done it on, let's say, a tablet or some other device, there's feedback for the parent to look at how the student did throughout the day in school, whether they had a hard time learning or did something. So there'd be immediate feedback. So that's where it's actually going. And this is the REST APIs that is coming in, so that there's interactions with different services. So that's where it's going. So if you are interested in developing for Spire, think web application. That's what I would highly recommend. But again, possible to do desktop application as well with the REST API. So that's an option as well. I briefly showed before, so the Spire REST API platform is the Flask API, and I'm just gonna go and check. Where am I? Hold on a second, just give me a minute. Where is my... Oh, there we go. Just to confirm, can some of you just raise your hands to make sure you can still hear me? You can see my screen. Yeah, so I see people are raising their hand. Okay, I'll lower all hands. Thank you. Okay, so I'll continue here. So the Flask API that Spire is using, that's this year. So they essentially just take this and plug it into their platform, install the components that are needed. So there is Apache, the Apache server, for those of you who are technical people, that is running in the background, or Python and Flask 1. I think I also read somewhere it's the Apache server. So there's actually a server component that has to run on the Spire server in order to service the REST API as a web interface. So that's all bundled in, or all compiled into the Spire server installer. We don't have to worry anything about that, whereas sometimes when you develop a certain application, you have to make sure you install the right components to run. So we don't have to worry about any of that. It's all done by the installer of the Spire server, and we just go and make use of the service. So it's very nice in that we don't have to learn anything about what's running behind the scene to make this all work. So then the roadmap, I just came back and checked today. Since, I don't know, about 3-4 months ago, since Spire first had the initial beta release, I've been coming back here on and off, my developer as well, just to come and take a look. They've already added a lot of information here. It's a new project. I don't know exactly what led to this project. I know that this API is based on the Danggo, or however you would pronounce that. But this was an offshoot of this project, and then it became its own. So obviously, there must have been some, I guess, like disagreement between the developers, and one person wanted to take it to a level that the other person did. And so then usually what happens with these open source projects, they split off, and then they go their own way, and then they start developing. So there's a lot more information that has been posted here since it started 4 months ago. So now you already have samples, you have all kinds of information here. And if you ever want to know, in terms of activity of a product, if they're on GitHub, and I'll briefly talk about this, we use it a lot, and this may be something that may be of interest to you as well. If you want to know, and if you're working with a certain project, and say it's open source or even closed source, who doesn't show you the source. So this is an open source project, so you can dig around in the source if you wanted to. You can just go to GitHub, and the majority of, like, largely all companies today, they use GitHub in some way. So GitHub is a platform that was founded for managing versions of applications. And if you're serious about developing and you really want to get an application going, I highly recommend to use GitHub, or there's other services. This is the most popular one. To manage your version, your releases, your commits, and your branches. Releases being you release a version and you actually have a certain, so you have a, when you do a release, I'll just take a look at this here. You have a versioning number, and then you have the source code with each release. It's a very comprehensive platform. You need to take some learning. Took us some time to learn it. Very comprehensive platform for managing your software applications and versioning them. It's also in the cloud, so it's not something you can deploy on your own environment. So when you do, you can go and make repositories where you essentially keep your code. You can make them private so that no one could access them. If it is open source, then of course everything is available. So in this case, the Flask API that Spire is using, they are on GitHub here, and I just checked today. So if you ever want to check to see, is there a lot of activity? Are they actually actively developing? You can see that they committed something 7 days ago. Here you can see some of the dates. Then you know that it's an active project. So that's always something that I come and look at. So looking at anything in technology that we want to use, or some kind of framework that we may be interested in and using for a certain project, I usually come, if they do have a GitHub repository for an application, I usually come and look, like, okay, is there actively being developed? And if you see something like, oh, the last commit was like a year ago, well, then you know that there's no serious development behind it. So here you can see 7 days ago, there's been some commits, some file changes here, the version number. So when we look at the release of this, the last release was 7 days ago. It was 0.64. So you know that there's ongoing activity on this API, which is a very good thing for us, because we get something that's being developed and that's being looked after for the Spire API. So this is the platform that Spire is using. And again, come here to learn. But a big part as well is to find other sources to learn, and I'll mention one at the end. So next, what did I have here? So REST API verbs. So more technical details about how the REST API works. It's essentially verbs: get, post, put, delete. There's a few other ones. That's when you get more in depth involved, and we haven't even gotten that far. So these are the 4 core ones. Get, basically when you do a get on a data through the REST API architecture, you are reading it. You're getting it from a source. And I'll show you an endpoint. So we've looked at an endpoint for Spire. So when we look here, so this is when I'm loading this page and I'm loading customer endpoint here, I'm doing a get. So essentially, this is the get here. So you see the verbs here. I'm doing a get. So I'm getting the data. That's essentially what it is. And that's when I read it. So then I do get the data. I get my status. Was it okay? And then the content type. And I'll briefly talk about that some more. So then a post, that is when you're inserting a record. This would be just the same as doing an insert into a database, insert syntax for SQL. Put is like updating a record, and delete, it's very obvious, of course, it's when you want to delete a source. So then what you have in the REST API, you have the URI, URL. That's your first part to make up a call. Second is the media type. So this is an important part to understand, in that there's various media types available for when you work for the REST API. So as you can see here, from my get through to a customer endpoint, you see here application/JSON. That is what is being used by default for the Spire REST API. Highly recommend that if you're wanting to develop for Spire API and in general learn to use the REST API, you want to learn JSON. That's what you want to do. But that said, you also have the ability for the media type to use XML. And I don't see, I thought there was one more here for Spire. I don't see that now. You have to use XML. JSON is not as readable as XML. XML is easier to understand, and I'll show you guys an endpoint here from Magento. So this is a Magento endpoint, and this is an XML format. So as you can see, and again, those of you who have long history of developing for Business Vision, you may already know what XML is. So XML is a bit more readable than the JSON when you look at the data, like the raw data. But both of them work. So again, for the Spire API, the default is JSON. You can do the media type XML or even some other ones. There's some other ones. These are the two most popular ones. You can use them. So whatever you do, I highly recommend that you learn JSON. That will get you the furthest. There's a lot of flexibility there, and definitely flexibility that's not available with XML media type. Then you have your verbs, so get, post, put, delete. Links to references. So a reference in this case is the customer. So this would be your, well, in this case too, the database, the company. In this case, all three of these would make up a reference. So it's referring you to something. The company is referring you to something. So you have the reference, after you get into the company, and then you have Inspire Health, which is the database in this case, that is referring you to something. So it's referring you to additional sources. And then I have the customer in this case. That is the link reference, the state. Then you have the endpoint. So endpoint is always something like this. So in this case, when we would be looking it up, and I'm not sure why this was not working here for me. Let me try that again. Let's see if it will work. Yes, actually, the thing I didn't do before, I erased the slash here, and then it does not work. So you have to have that. So what I just did here, my reference here in this case is companies. Now it's listing the companies here for me. And then when I go to like a company endpoint, Inspire Health, now it's showing me all the other references available to me to go and get information from. So technically, the companies is an endpoint because it gives me the company names that are on the list, and then I have my my company once I'm in it. So these, technically what I'm seeing all here, these are all references. There's no endpoint. So then I go, for example, to the customer, and still, this is just a reference in that I have not gone to an actual endpoint. But then, as you can see, where here we have where it says self, when you want to go to a customer record. So first it shows you the ID here, I believe. No, it actually doesn't show you the ID, it just shows you the customer number. So now if I wanted to go and see every detail about the customer, then I go to this. And now that I've gone to inside of customer, this is my endpoint. So that's my endpoint. So when you're looking at doing anything with the REST API, your goal is always to do everything in between to get you to the endpoint. So then you have everything, like I said before, you have network security, you have your URI, first opening ports and so forth, and SSL certificates. Then you have your URI, then you have your references, and then you have your endpoint. So your goal is obviously always to get to the endpoint because that's where you want to do your work. You want to do a get, delete, put, and so forth. So then here, I'm showing you an endpoint of a customer record. So then in Magento here, this is what an endpoint looks like. So again, API REST products 166. So that's my endpoint to get to an endpoint for a given product. And then depending on what's going to be published, so here's one thing that we've asked Spire to develop and have extensively discussed it with Peter, and they're actually going to be implementing this, so that's good news for us. Images. So here on this magenta one, and I can't show you that in Spire because it's not there, but here in this particular endpoint for magenta, you see that I have my my image URL, and I'm going to show you what this is going to do. So I'm going to take my endpoint for the image, and I'm going to go and enter. Now what you will see, it has loaded the image of that product. In the magenta one, for the inventory, it does not require authentication because it's the same as if you were browsing the website and browsing for products on given websites. So there's no authentication at the inventory level. Once you get at the customer level, then yes, there's authentication and token exchange and everything else. So what I've just shown you is I did an image endpoint. And what this basically means, and here's a really good opportunity, and I'm sure some of you are going to want to take advantage of it. We are already doing it. We are just waiting for Spire to finish it up. Is that, say if Spire, this is potentially one thing that's coming. Spire currently only does, so BV only did one image per product, and Spire does one only currently as well. And currently the image that you link to Spire is stored in a database. It's not stored in a physical path anymore like it used to be in Business Vision. So that's a very good start, meaning that if you back up your database, that's all you're backing up. You don't have to back up a physical path somewhere where these images are stored. With Peter in the developers, there's been a little bit of discussions on how they're going to handle it. They may all of a sudden go the physical path. I don't know how they're going to work and what they're all going to do. Applications do this differently. So Magento actually has a physical path where the image is being stored. But the big thing here is that when you think from a development perspective, is that if you would develop your application, your web application, or again, could be a desktop application, to look at an image in Spire, essentially what that is, and the way we are using it in the Magento is, if you program the endpoint to look for a given item, in this case, my ID is 166, I can, in my code, I can program it and I can go in and include the image endpoint, and it's essentially, it's real time. So you have a user in Spire, they go and update their image in Spire, and you make use of the endpoint. The minute they hit save in Spire, and somebody goes to your web service where that image is being published to, they can go to that in its real time. So it's not like there's a delay of any form of syncing of images, and then your application can see that image. It's real time. And this is one very practical example of why the REST API is so important, in that it's all real time. There's no delays of any form of syncing and so forth. So that's coming in Spire. We've asked for it, and they are going to be implementing it. And the one thing we also asked for is to have more than one image per inventory item, and then make image endpoints for all pictures in the REST API. So that's a big one for us. We're going to be making heavy use out of it on the BV and our e-commerce integration. What we had an image syncing process, and it's very tedious and takes a long time to sync up, especially when you have 1,000 images and stuff, and it never worked the best. It works, but not the best. So now in this case, we have real time. We will just go and look at the REST API. Somebody visits a record, an inventory record, and the REST API will immediately display the actual current image that's attached in Spire, versus having to do some complicated syncing and so forth. So that's a very practical example, just to give you an idea as to what this will all do for you as you work with Spire. So I briefly talked about endpoints. So that's that part. So from a perspective of working with it, excellent performance. Now still, again, going back to maybe even one step further than network performance, wherever Spire is going to be end up being residing in your network or on the customer's network, you of course want to have a decent server, a server that will be able to handle the application well. Number one, for all the users internally accessing the application, and for for servicing the web requests for the REST API. So that all has to be in place, has to be a sophisticated server in order to be able to do it. If you just have desktop hardware and you're expecting good performance out of that, well, I don't think you would get too far. So accent performance, simplicity of interface. Again, like I've said before, you are learning the REST API, and so once you know the REST API, you know it for many different for all different applications. Google Maps, Facebook, all these major companies, they publish APIs to access their services, and so that's the important part here, is that you learn about the REST API versus just thinking about learning about the Spire API. Will get you a long ways. More resources. Here's a resource that we've used in the past and still sometimes do. There's a lot of courses available with this resource, Plural Site. I don't know if anybody have ever seen it. It's a very comprehensive training website. There is a cost involved. You can sign up for a 10-day trial, I believe 300 minutes. So you can watch 300 minutes of courses within those 10 days. Then there is a cost involved. I believe it's monthly or yearly, whichever one you want to do. And they have courses on everything. So if you want to educate yourself by sitting in front of your computer in the office or at home, this is an excellent source to come to for courses. And so here's one course, REST Fundamentals. So this would be like you're getting started in what it is. This course will teach you quite a bit about the architectural style. So you would be learning things like what we already have here. We already have the Flash API for Spire. In this course, you'd be learning about those concepts, and so it's theory. There's a lot of theory involved, and then towards the end is more practical examples involved as well. But a good place to start is to learn the theory. That's a good place, and I think we all know that whoever went to university or college to learn something, that all started with theory, and then we come down to doing things practically once we get on with our careers and work with customers and so forth. So a really good source for learning and so forth. So here you can browse their courses, and you will see like courses. So right now, actually showing 1,702 courses. That's how many they have. So Photoshop, Microsoft, Developer, and then you can get into databases, into whatever platform you may be working with. So an excellent source for you to come to. And prices, I believe, quite reasonable. I don't see that here right now. Where do they have their pricing? I think it's something like $29 a month. I don't see them here now. Pretty sure it's $20-some a month, and you can sign up on a monthly basis and go and take your couple courses that you're interested in, and then cancel, and then maybe come back in a year again and sign up again. Very reasonably priced and very comprehensive in terms of their training. So highly recommend them. Briefly, as I mentioned a few examples of Magento. So just mention what it is that we are working on. So we are working on the Magento integration for Spire. So it's we call it Magento Link to Spire. So that's what we are working on. So as many of you know and have made referrals to us, we have that for BV currently. With the, again, Spire, we're able to do so much more and so much more sophisticated. So that is what we're working on. And then we are hard at work on a mobile app, as I mentioned before, for Spire as well. So basically, you will be able to take it everywhere you go. And this app will be comprehensive, and it will, starting with customers, inventory, vendor, the two most important ones, warehouse management. We will be building that into the app where you can receive inventory with the app. And with the Magento Link, we're using, I didn't talk about, my previous call, I talked a little bit about SOAP API. That used to be a previous standard, which was started by Microsoft, but eventually became an open source project as well. That's a older API method. We're using that slightly, so it's more complicated, that API. We're using that slightly because there are some advantages in using that versus the only the Spire API. So on the Magento integration, we use that slightly, but that's all behind the scenes. To the end user, it doesn't matter what's being used. For the API for Spire that we are developing, we're exclusively using the Spire API for that one. So there we are not doing anything else but that, and it's going to be a nice, very sophisticated app. And what I'm going to show you now is, like I said, the access database that we quickly put together just to, and again, which I will share with you guys so that you can go and play with it yourself. So as you will see right off the start, just based on the names, it's based on JSON. So here again, if you want to really get into it, you want to learn how to write code for the API and JSON media type. So that's what this is. So you'll be able to see it here. You'll see, and you can go and look at the code. And what we're doing in this database, you essentially just have one form. This is the form that does a get customer data. We didn't do any fancy labeling, nothing. It's just very, very basic, just to show, to put together an example. So you can do get customer data and put customer data. And so I'll show an example in terms of what we are doing here. So first what I'll do here is I'll go to the Spire API and I'll show you later on how you will configure this to your own servers. So here you can see I'm looking at an endpoint 277. Now once you would develop, then of course you have to get sophisticated so that you could actually go and do lookups based on customer number versus the endpoint 277. The endpoint is critical. You have to know that when you call a source, but you would translate a customer number into an endpoint. So when you do any type of calling, because the ID that's hidden, that's in the database, it's not visible to the end user. So if an end user entered your application and needed to know that ID number before they could do any type of web call to the Spire API, that would not be very meaningful because they won't know that ID number. So in your development, you have to, of course, become sophisticated in developing, considering the customer number and the ID. So in this case, you can see that I have my customer number. My customer is ADVA284, and my endpoint is 277. And I'm just going to make sure I did a little bit of testing here before. Did I already have that one in here? Yes, I do. So I will pick a different one. Let's go to the next one. So here I have 1798. Let's see, do I have that one in here? No, not that one. I don't. I have two other ones. So this is my customer. So I'm going to go inside this customer, 1798. That's the ID, and that's the customer number is ACTI620. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go and do get. And what we've done in this database, just as a sample, which I don't know if you may not do, we've created a table where we do a get and we insert the data into the Access database. So again, it was 1798. Do the main form. So 1798. I have it selected to get the customer data, so I submit the form, and just a little pop-up message: success, get customer data done. And now when I go, I'm going to close this, and when I'm going to go into my table, you see now I've inserted that record into here. That's right there. That's the record. I just did a get on that record. Now I'm going to go and take something, and I'm going to add something on this data for that customer record. So let me also open up Spire, and I'll look up that customer number, ACT. I should have done this before. Just bear with me a little bit. Spire opens up. Oh, what happened? Okay, for now I'll leave it. I'll just show you guys in the API. I'm sure it will also install. Oh, there we go. I don't know why it took so long. So you can see that I did a customer get for the ID number. Let me just log in here. Spire Health. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. So I'm in Spire Health database. This is our development server. I don't know, something must be going on. It seems to be awfully slow. Okay, I'll just go to the endpoint in the API. So what I'm going to do here now in this Access database, I'm going to go and look up that same customer. So I'm going to say 1798. I'm going to select first put. Put is going and updating a record, as I explained before. So 1798 tab. Now that loads that customer record from the Access table here, from the customer's records table. And I'm just going to go and show and update a few things here. So Inc. Let's make that change. I'll add a fax number. 9431608. So I'll just make it a different. That's the fax number. And what else can I update here? Just change that to street. And I'm going to go and submit form. And there we go. It's giving me a success saying that it's been updated. And now when I'm going to go back to my endpoint here, and I'm just going to go and refresh it. And there you can see now ink. I updated this ink and the fax number. I added a fax number. Didn't have a fax number before, so I added a fax number. And I changed this to street versus I think it was avenue or something like that. So that's now updated from this Access database, and that's what we've done, and that's what I will be sharing with you guys. Let's just go and find that record, ACT. I think that's what it was. Maybe not. It was ACT 1620. That seems to be very slow. I'm not sure what's going on here, but so you can see the points. You can see that I took and updated the record from Access, and that did update the record through the Spire API. So that's simple. So this will get you going if you want to delve in and learn. I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, have worked with Access at one point or another point. So I figured I would have my developer create a quick database, just throw it together and share it with everyone. So the first thing you'll do, so when you get this and you want to play with it, the setup data, here I have the URL where I'm connecting to, and the database name, the entity. So that is the reference, entity reference that's referred to as both customers, meaning that's the endpoint I'm looking at, and username and password. So you have to enter this. So when I'm going to be giving this to you, the URL, I will just leave it blank, or I'll just add a local host something, and then so that you know what the format and what it needs to look like. And then you need to enter your database, your entity. You could play with this and make it work for the inventory, if let's say you wanted to, but then you would also have to change these the code in these modules to add the proper fields and everything else. So it works for the customer endpoint to do any updates. And then your username and password. So this data, I will just add localhost into this here when I share it with all of you. And then you can just go, depending on what server you're on, what port and whatnot, you can just go and change that information here. And that is it. Anyone with some questions? So if you have a question, you will see on your screen, you can just ask the question there by typing it. I had two individuals who raised their hand. I take it that you guys want to ask a question. So what I'm going to do, Alex, you have your hand raised. I'm going to go and promote you to a panelist, and what it will do, it will allow you to ask a question live. So just a second here. Can you hear us, Alex, now?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Okay, so the question is regarding authentication and security.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure I understood you correctly at the beginning. There's no form of encryption or any token-based authentication. It's all clear text, simple authentication. Is that correct?
So there's already encryption, so SSL. So you have to use the SSL certificate. And I should have perhaps touched on this a little bit more. I actually wanted to show something more, than now just remember. So I'll show briefly a bit more on the encryption. So currently we do have an SSL certificate. So when you visit the and I'll just minimize the screen. When you visit the Spire API, you see that it is. Oops, no, let me go back to the server here. There we go. So you see that it's HTTPS. This is just this is just a self-signed certificate, and that certificate resides over here. This is the certificate. It's in the C program files 86 Spire server. That's the certificate, and I know that some of you struggle with this and were wondering how do you make use of that certificate. So I'll show you guys a brief example here, and so you can see how the certificate works when you make use of it. The first step you'll have to do, depending on where you want to use it, you'll have to convert this certificate. So you will take this file, and then you'll go to something like, let me just minimize my server screen here. So you'll go to something like a service. I found one here and I used them and it worked. Now you have to make sure you can trust the source too, because if you convert it over here, then that also means they have your certificate. I tried this one the other day. I just took the certificate from Spire, I loaded it into here, and I said type of certificate. I said PAM, and then I told it what I want to convert this into. So here's where you need to understand certificates a little bit so that you can convert it. I converted it into a CTR, I think the extension is, and that's the most standard one where you can use, and that's what we did here. And I'll show you guys an example.
Yeah, that's a basic web certificate you can use in Apache or IIS or anything like that.
That's correct. Yeah. So here we are using it in just for testing purposes. We are using it in Magento specific, and we have converted into a CRT certificate. So here you can see as a converted certificate. So number one, you need to convert it in whatever form you need it, in whatever development you're doing. You need to go and convert it and then use it accordingly. And again, like I said, here's one website where I did a conversion of a Spire certificate. I think my developer used this as well. I'm sure the Spire will work, and that we will eventually be able to add our own certificate. So you essentially be able to go to GoDaddy and purchase a certificate and add it. We are in our mobile development efforts. We are using a proxy, and depending on what framework you're going to be using, there are options available. We're using a proxy, then that doesn't rely on the certificate. It does in terms of encryption, but it does not rely on the fact that we have to have the certificate installed at the other end in order to work. For our web development, for Magento, we have to have the certificate on the Magento side in order to communicate with Spire. So there's something to be learned here, and you want to get familiar. If you're doing development, web development, you want to get familiar with how the certificate works. And then, yes, back to your question, Alex. Spire, it does, like I mentioned here, it does not have the token exchange, the Auth2. We saw that here in the roadmap, so it is coming, and I'm sure Spire will take and implement it then. That is the next level of security, and that is really where we want to be with any of the development effort that we are doing.
Okay. And one more question based on what you just told us here. The PEM file, can we not just generate our own, like create, first of all, an SSL certificate that we would get from VeriSign or Start SSL, and then convert that to a PEM file and use that within the application?
We haven't tried that. That is possible. I don't know, and maybe there would already be some documentation on it here. We would have to read through it. So this is probably most likely something that Spire would not necessarily even, I don't know if they would know if you could help, ask them for help. We haven't tried it, but it's likely that it would work. You would have to, but then again, I'm not sure what, because usually there's an intermediate certificate when you get one. But in terms of getting a certificate, any source you go to, I think they would give you the option of downloading it in different formats, and you would straight from there download it as a PEM file, and then you would make use of it. Yeah.
And then convert it to a PKCS. Okay.
Yeah, and whatever format you would need it to, you would convert it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? I'm gonna check here. Let's see. I think there were a few other questions. Are you sending out the follow-up recording of this presentation today? I will try. It takes a while to upload it. It's a long recording, so it's already an hour long. So it takes a while to upload it to YouTube. So that's the biggest part. So I have to just get in the right format, upload it to YouTube, and that can sometimes take an hour or so for large recordings like this. So I will try to. Most likely it won't get done today because I have to get ready for it. So I'll get it out tomorrow, and then in the email, there'll be one follow-up email coming from Zoom just thanking you for attending. That email won't have any information. Then I will send a follow-up email, and that will have the Access database attached as well, and I will have the link for the YouTube recording, the video recording as well. Any other questions? Anyone who wants to ask a question live, just raise your hand, and I'm going to unmute you. One other question here. Is there a website for the tablet application? Can you clarify? I'm not sure what you mean for the tablet application. Meaning, are you saying that if you want to develop for my mobile? Oh, okay, so the tablet or the phone application work. So far, we don't have any information out. It's still being cooked up as we speak. We don't have any information on it. But as soon as there will be some information available on it, we will have the initial release. So far, we don't have an official release. It's just being developed. I will be sending out information to the partners, and yeah. So as soon as there's something else available, you'll hear about it. Yeah. But at the moment, we don't have any information. We're just working on it. And just for those of you who are interested, I know that mobile development, app development, it's going to be it's a big one. Like everybody develops apps these days for just about anything they're doing. There's a couple platforms. One that you may want to start with, it's called Apery. Let me just close this screen. It's called Apery.io. It's essentially a platform where you don't need to know any code. There's a lot of drag and drop. You can start with a free account. You only have 3 pages. So there's a lot of drag and drop. You don't need to know a lot of code. We tried with this one originally for the authentication, and that turned out to be just didn't work well with drag and drop. And with some JavaScript, we got it to work with this platform, but we ultimately ended up opting for a different platform, a different framework where we're going to develop. And so we are developing strictly in JavaScript. But if you want to get going, you want to do something, this is a good place to start. But I already can tell you that with the authentication, you will have problems, and that does require you have to be very knowledgeable in Java already if you want to make that work. So my developer got that to work with a little bit of Java code, but now we are using a different platform, PhoneGap.com. That's the platform we're using, and here you develop strictly in Java. So you have to know HTML and CSS, but any of the logic you're going to build into your application, that's Java based. So that's what we are using. So for those of you who are exploring, we tested all kinds of environments, tested different things, and we ended up really liking this one. This is a very sophisticated. It's owned by Adobe, so it has very good backing. It's an open source platform as well, but has very good backing in terms of resources, and there's continued development. They're adding all kinds of nice features. So this is one of them. But again, here you couldn't do anything without being very good at JavaScript. Here you can do things without some basic stuff, a lot of drag and drop. So you could start, but again, the authentication method you're going to need to know Java here as well. So those are two. This is what we started off with, a little bit playing around, but then we settled on this one, and this is what we are working with. Okay, so yeah, as soon as there's more information available on our mobile development efforts, you'll hear about it, and I'll probably schedule some webinars to showcase it and let you guys see it. And then what we are planning in terms of our mobile development effort for Spire, we'll have the app, a basic app for free, so anybody will be able to download it. Of course, you have to have the network configured in order to talk to it, in whichever form that would take. And so it will be free. It will just be read-only, so you'll be able to look up information. And then we will have the professional edition, which will allow you to, of course, interact with Spire, creating orders on your mobile phone, and they'll get created in Spire. So that's what we are planning on doing, or are working on. Any other questions? Again, if anybody wants to live ask the question, then just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. So I hope you found this training helpful. I will be doing a poll here, like I mentioned at the beginning. So if you wouldn't mind just asking 4 questions, and it's just a yes or no question, and that would help to just kind of get to know as to what you are, whether you found it useful or not. So you'll have a screen popping up now where you will see a poll, and you can go and just click yes, no. And I believe there was another question here. How do you see what operations they've built into the API? How do you see what operation? Charlie, what you want to do is the operations they built, and you actually want to go to the Flask API. That would be your first starting point for installation in different documentation. So there's already quite a bit more documentation here than there was at the beginning. You can also go to like the original project. There's a lot of documentation here as well. So these two, if you go to the Flask API, you'll see on top they have a link to this other API and what it started off as. So that's where you can go and get yourself information on what they've done, what they built in. And then Spire, I think they will provide some samples as well. So okay, so it looks like some of you answered the poll. Leave it open here for just a little bit longer. Looks like a new question came in. Actually, I meant what entity Spire has in the API up to this. Oh, okay, so okay, I got your question. Okay, so what entities they've built in? So currently, we are able to access the endpoints for the customers, and to do we can do a get on all of these. So when we look at these endpoints here, we can do a get on all of these endpoints. So you can go to user-defined types, users. You can access knowledge. You can do a get on all of them. But currently, they only allow us to do a put in a delete update to the customer endpoint, to the inventory endpoint, and to the let's see, sales endpoints here, which we have the orders, the items, batches. So I believe here. Let's double check on this. Oh no, here we only have a get. So this is a sales order invoice, and this is history here. I thought we already had the option that we could do orders, but based on what I'm seeing here, it's not possible. At least not a delete. Oh, you have a post, so we can, but we cannot delete a sales order. Well, I guess we would probably never want that. I'm not sure if that's going to be available. So I know that those are the three endpoints: customer, inventory, and sales order. Those are the three that are available right now. We've asked for the addresses as well. That's coming. And mainly, the reason we asked for this to Spire is because we want the ability so that when a customer adds an address or makes an address change on the Magento side on the e-commerce platform, so that that address update is immediately reflected in Spire. That has been a real challenge for us too on our previous development with BV and Magento, with all the syncing there involved. So now we make it real time. The minute the customer hits save on their updated address or adding a new ship to address online for sending to, that is immediately reflected on the e-commerce platform. And of course, it's something we will have an option to disable. Some customers don't like it, like the fact that a customer can go and add an address or add an address. They have to email or call in. So that's an option you can disable. But that's coming. So that's what we've asked for. And the other thing, the big thing that we asked for as well is the endpoint for the images in the inventory record. So that is coming as well. And I'm sure they're going to go and enhance it. So one of the things that we are looking forward to is we're looking forward to having the ability to display the AR record. So say an AR invoice for the customers online. We have a number of customers, and this is becoming more popular. I'm not sure why companies do it. From a financial standpoint, it doesn't quite make sense, but maybe it makes sense to them. So they actually allow the customer to first take it out on AR, let's say on 30 days, but then they also give them the ability to go and pay for it by credit card, which we can do now. We can allow them to pay, but it still needs to be manually applied in AR and BV when somebody goes and pays for an invoice. And with the API here, and that will come down the road, I know it's not an ability now, with the AR, we will be able to go and apply a payment to AR through the REST API, and that immediately would do everything from what it would have done when it's done manually. It would create the GL entry, everything behind the scene. I mean, all we would have to go and just talk to the AR endpoint and say we are applying a payment to this, and it's this payment type, and whatever else will be needed to make the payment complete. And that would then go and create a GL entry, everything. So that's also going to be real time. And so there's a lot of things here that that we are very excited about in terms of what we will be able to do and the solutions we'll be able to deliver for customers, particularly around Sierra web e-commerce and then the mobile application as well. So I hope that answered your question, Shelley. If you have a follow-up, just type it out. Anyone else? That looks like that's it then. I will end the training, and again, you'll get a link to the recording, and also that email will include the Access database so that you can play around and do some test driving yourself. So thank you everyone for joining, and also feel free to send an email if you have any questions and need some basic help in getting going. Be happy to help everyone out. Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone.